Let's talk about Choropleth maps. Choropleth maps are nothing special really, but they're one of the standard maps that you often see, which name you've probably never heard of before. So if I just write it up here, Choro, pleth, oops, I misspelt it, Choropleth with a TH at the end. A Choropleth map, like I said, you see it all the time, and it's an enormously helpful type of map, but almost never do we get asked to create one. We're only ever really asked to interpret them. So that's what I expect you to be tested on if you're ever given a Choropleth map, is mainly just interpretation. But it's pretty straightforward if you wanted to make one of your own, and you can use lots of different applications, including Excel, or just making one by hand. Essentially, we get a map, and in this case, we've got a global map here, and which is made up of different segments. In this case, the segments are just the countries of the world. And what a choropleth map will do is it will map a feature or the distribution or the intensity of whatever particular feature is being mapped using colors. So choropleth, we are really thinking about the colors here. You know, if I'm teaching this to kids, I'll often just call it a color map to begin with, and then once we're used to recognizing it, and we can move on to using some of the more technical language. So a choropleth map does use colors, and the most effective choropleth maps, which are probably drawn the best, will tend to use one or two colors, grading between the two. So from a light to dark color. That's not always the case. Sometimes choropleth maps have multiple different colors, but you just got to deal with the one that's been put in front of you. So this choropleth map you can see down here in the key. If I just try and highlight it, there we are. So down here at the key, we can see it starts from almost a white color and goes through a yellow color all the way to a dark red. So that's theoretically about three colors that are shifting between, but they're not too far away from each other on the color spectrum. So we go from light to dark. When we use a key like this, it's always good to remember for a choropleth map that the lighter the shading of the color, the less intense or the less frequently a feature is occurring. And the darker the shade of the color will indicate that the feature is occurring more often or more intensely. So to put that into a bit of context, we need to know, and I apologize for moving the map on you, we need to know what is being mapped. So you always, besides just reading a key, will also need to know about the title of the map. Now, this map I've chosen doesn't really have a title except for what is labelled on the key, the percentage of the population that is enslaved. So not a nice topic, but certainly one that relates to the world that we live in today and some of the things going on. So if we look at this, we are able to use not precise data a lot of the time. That's one of the deficiencies or negatives about using a choropleth map. It's not always, I'll just note that down, not precise. It's not always the case that we're able to, look inside a country. So if we look at Australia, for example, Australia's got this nice sort of light neutral tone, which if we look down here and we are looking at percentage of the population, it to me sort of fits in here. So we're going from 0.04, to, I guess that's probably 0.1. I don't even know how to read the scale on this one. That's my fault. Anyway, what that tells me is a general indicator of what Australia's enslavement rate is like, its percentage, sorry. But that means that I'm talking about the whole of the country. So that doesn't give me data about how many people are enslaved in Tasmania versus the Northern Territory. So that's a bit of a negative. It doesn't tell me anything about whether these enslaved people are men, women, children, adults, the aged. So there's a bit of a negative in that data because we're just looking at general patterns, often with choropleth maps. And it's not until we align it with some other data sets, more specific data when we zoom in. One of the positives, though, is that we can maybe look at general patterns. So if I put a major positive for myself, is we can see general patterns really clearly. So what I mean by that is that I can see in the Americas, both North and South, generally speaking, there is not much enslavement going on according to the data that's being represented here. So that general pattern is fairly evident there. Whereas in other places in the world, say in Africa, that general pattern is reversed. So there is a lot more slave enslavement happening. Now, for me, that being a strong positive, I still need to weigh up sometimes the comments that I might make. So I could say generally speaking, but I won't necessarily be precise in my way of speaking. So I won't necessarily say all of the people in Africa are enslaved. I'd have to temper the language that I use. So the general idea with choropleth maps is that they give you a nice visual representation of data, which, if you think about a table full of numbers, sometimes this data doesn't necessarily come straight. So the story the data is trying to say doesn't necessarily jump out at you straight from a data set. Much like looking at climate data in a table versus climate data drawn as a climate graph. Sometimes the visual is here there to help tell the story. Is there anything else I can think about choropleth maps and talk to you about? We're just going for the basics here, right? So don't get too excited. So all we'll need to be able to do is to look at a choropleth map, recognize that it's using color. The gradation of one particular color would be great. And when we do that, we want to say that the lighter the color means that it's happening less, lighter for less, yeah? And the more intense a color, so we might say the darker the color. Oops, I was going to write darkers. That doesn't make sense. The darker the color, the more frequently something is happening, or more intense the thing is happening. Okay, so this particular one map does it really well, but you're going to be presented with other ones when we go to test you. I might leave it there. Remember, ask your teacher for help, don't ask me.